Well, looking to the international scene now, the U.S. Trade Commission threw out the 300% anti-dumping countervailing duties imposed by the Trump administration. The commission found that Bombardier's C-Series jets are no threat to Boeing. A big win for Canada and a shock for the U.S. aerospace giant. Joining me now is Chris Sands, the director at the Center for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Chris, people did not expect this. They thought that those duties were going to stick. Why did the Trade Commission come to the decision that it did?
I think the key to understanding this case is that it's a dumping case. And dumping is different than countervailing duties, which we often see, where you say the other side's unfairly subsidized, that sort of thing. Here, the case hinged on Boeing's contention that Bombardier's sale of C-Series jets to Delta sold below the cost of production of the jet, and that this was deliberately designed to eat market share and hurt the market player, Boeing, in this market. So that was the contention. It's not surprising that the Department of Commerce initially found in favor, because the commerce process tends to favor the plaintiff, especially if it's a U.S. company. But the ITC is a more level playing field kind of arbiter. They looked at it and they said, well, it's not clear that this price was below production, because determining production costs are tricky with a new plane, because the more you sell, the cheaper it gets. It's also not clear that Boeing, which doesn't make a plane that exactly fits this market niche the C-Series has of a 100 to 150 seat plane, was materially injured. And so in this case, because it was dumping, I'm not entirely surprised that the ITC just didn't find that the Boeing case held up.
Now, what happens with Trump now? Because here they've been championing this. In fact, he was in Davos today, and he was talking about protectionist trade partners. They've made a few not so subtle jabs at Canada over aerospace, lumber, softwood lumber, newsprint, and certainly this was another issue. Can he come back and counter this in another way to try to push forward that protectionist rhetoric, or does it kind of cut it out from under him?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I think that Donald Trump has fashioned himself as a champion of the U.S. worker, but also of U.S. business. And you heard that in his speech at Davos. U.S. is open for business. And so in that way, he, of course, embraced this case. But the facts just weren't there on the Boeing side, even though I think the Commerce Department did its best to make the case. It would be hard to say that Donald Trump and his administration had failed the U.S. industry, more that the case itself was somewhat weaker. I think it makes an even stronger case, though, for the need to have a NAFTA 2.0 successfully concluded. We live by the rules, we die by the rules, you win some, you lose some, but only if we all respect the rules. And so if the Trump administration tries to rebring the case or find some new grounds to go after Bombardier, I think it'll suggest that the U.S. isn't really respecting the rules. I'm hopeful instead they'll say, let's make sure the rules are fair in NAFTA 2.0 and move forward on a fair basis for all sides.
Yeah, and that's sort of the last question I wanted to ask you is, here we are in the midst of NAFTA negotiations. I can imagine what the reaction must be like in that room today as they receive this and they're still trying to negotiate. Is there a clear direction that pushes the negotiations in one way or the other?
Well, I think there are some businesses that have embraced Donald Trump's more protectionist rhetoric, and cases like the Boeing one have been filed in part to take advantage of what they think is a sympathetic administration to calls for protection of U.S. industries. For those companies that were saying, well, I'm not that keen on NAFTA, we could live without it, they're now going to probably conclude that, we need NAFTA. Ultimately, we can't rely on these kinds of cases to shift the playing field in our favor. We're going to have the rules written in the right way and improved. So I think it makes NAFTA renegotiation more important for the business community. And I should say, most of the U.S. business community is open to changing NAFTA, but they very much do not want to see it go. And I think if there's any message from this Boeing-Bombardier dispute, it's that the rules matter and that having a good trade liberalization agreement, a better NAFTA, is important for everyone involved.
I just thought of one last thing quickly, Chris. Does this vindicate the government up here a little bit, the Canadian government on the Bombardier thing and refusing to engage essentially with Boeing on fighter jet replacement?
Well, I always thought that was a bit of a muddled message. I mean, it was connecting two things that weren't necessarily connected. Almost a bribe to Boeing to go away if we buy some of your military jets. So I won't give the Trudeau government like gold stars for that strategy, because I think it was a bit muddling. And they still don't really have a jet except a leased jet from the Australians as a replacement for now. So I'll give them maybe a B- on that. But in terms of sticking with their companies and believing Bombardier's claim, I give them full marks.
Professor Sands, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mercedes.